morning, everyone. I hope everyone had a really good morning. Thank you for joining our today's session. This is session 13, focusing on Well-Architect framework. Today we have Rohini as one of our guest speaker to cover this session. And let me invite Rohini to join with me for this session. Hey, Rohini, how are you doing today?
I am doing good. Thank you for the invite, Sanjit. This is good to talk to the community again in the new year.
Thank you so much for accepting our invite and helping us for this session. It's really good to work with you. Let me give a quick shoot out for a quick introduction for you, and then I'll pass on the control for this today's session. I don't
Sure.
want to bore the audience more, so I'll quickly give you an introduction, and then I'll pass it on to you. People are very excited to look forward and hear from you. So yeah, let me give a quick introduction. So Rohini is a senior developer advocate at AWS. We all know about it. She's a very recognized person across different communities for the kind of work she do in contributing and promoting the communities. Like if I talk about the blog which just got live yesterday on Medium, where we were talking about what are the different mediums, different ways you can participate, you can contribute, or you can engage with different communities, the different programs, what you have like AWS Heroes, community builders. So those are the different ways Rohini always try to promote different communities across not just India, but across AWS ecosystem. And along with that, she also actively participates as speaker. As we saw in today's session, also she is one of our speaker. She has participated across different webinars worldwide to share her knowledge, what she have gathered over a past year from working in AWS. And that's what we'll see the way she will help us to understand the well architect, the principles which we need to apply while you're designing the architectures. With that, let me pass on the control to her for today's session. And I just want to request every audience, please do put the question in the chat. We'll happy to answer any of the questions, any of the stuff. Please, with that, Rohini, control is all yours.
Let me add my screen. Thanks for
Sure.
that introduction, Sanjit.
Thanks.
Glad to be here. So the blog that Sanchit mentioned, it's on dev.to. You can just check out my dev.to. Follow me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I keep sharing a lot of things that our community is doing. If I'm speaking at any events or if there are any events or any sessions that are happening, I share a lot. Not a lot that I will bombard you with a lot of misinformation. So I do share a lot. So do check out, connect with me. Good morning, Dora. Thank you for saying good morning in the chat. Please feel free to be interactive. I do have, that's why I'm looking down because I have the chat open here. So I keep checking it out. So feel free to keep this a bit more interactive and more fun for a lot of us. So a little bit about me before I go in. So yes, I've been with AWS for last 8+ years. I've spent most of my life as a solutions architect. So doing well-architected reviews with my customers was something that I would have done for few years. I would say I don't know how to count those years, but I've done well-architected reviews for a lot of customers, and there have been a lot of learnings for the customers, for us as well on what we used to do. Hey Rishikesh, thanks for joining in this morning, Sunday morning. Hope you had your breakfast and have your tea or coffee with you while we do this session. So first things first, we talk about well architected, right? So we are talking about architectures, we are talking about solutions, right? Architectures, I feel, should not be static, they should be evolving. Your architect, you need to keep going back and asking yourself a question, that are you well architected, right? Is your architecture doing what is best for the problem that you're trying to solve? So at its core, a solution is a way to describe an answer to a problem, right? There is a problem that could be a business problem, a technical problem. You're building applications to solve a certain problem that you see in the society today, right? So, solutions architecture translates any technical business needs into practical IT solutions, while you're also establishing certain rules and instructions on how this proper implementation is going to happen and delivery. Because a lot of people have this thought process of what does a solutions architect do, right? So first of all, you have to understand that a solutions architect uh, is also an architect. There are enterprise architects, there are technical architects, there are different types of name. Solution architects look at the business problems, they talk to the business side, they talk to the CXOs and CTOs, they talk to uh, the people who have created this application or this business, and they also talk to the IT. So the solutions architects sit in between. They try to translate what are the business needs into what are our technical, practical solutions that you have to have, right? So if you understand from an SA perspective, you need to be good at speaking to both. You need to understand the language of business and the language of tech. And that's why a lot of times these discussions that we have with well architected review are not just, Acha, which language are you using? Python? Okay, how many lines of code have you written? It's not around that. It's more around what is the business problem that we are trying to solve? How are we doing the best, giving the best possible solution for that business problem? And how frequently are we going and looking at that architecture and trying to reevaluate what we have, the decisions that we have taken? Because I'm telling you this from experience, right? A lot of customers, what they do, they have a team. They think, okay, let's we want to go with AWS. Let's host our application on AWS. They do their research. They host it on AWS, all in well. Great. 5 years later, 8 years later, I've seen customers not changing a thing. Like things how they were running, the things are running like similar way right now, and maybe in a worse condition because people have left the team, people have left the job, and people who left may have written documentation, maybe not written any documentation. We don't know. So people are just trying to fix things because there are a lot of issues that are coming up instead of work thinking big and thinking why these issues are coming up, right? So a lot of times you have to understand that architectures are evolving, should be evolving, and should not be starting in place. Hey Rohit, hey Rishikesh, thanks for joining. So, well architected framework is talking about how you can make your application or your solution, and it gives you a framework, it gives you a lot of guidance, it gives you a little bit more pointers to think about, is my application well architected, right? So, when you look at any workloads your team is building in your company or any project you are building, can you answer this question? Are you well architected? And we'll see in the course of this session what does it mean to be well architected. Well, essentially, you would think of well architected is that you're meeting, trying to have a perfect, not a perfect, I mean, nothing is perfect, I feel, but trying to have a balance of different things, right? For example, let me give you an example. There was a customer of mine, and they were like, we want the best possible solution for disaster recovery. Like, there should be no issue. And if there is an issue, within 5 milliseconds, we want our application to be up and running. And I was like, that's possible. I mean, why is it not possible? It is definitely possible. But then it is going to cost you a little bit more. Now, think about this, okay? You have video streaming applications like Netflix. You have applications that support a hospital and are related to someone's health, right? Which of these applications really needs that level of performance, really needs that level of resiliency? Think of this. Would you want to spend a lot more money on hospital related applications, or would you want to spend a lot more money on something that is just video streaming? And if it's down, it's not going to be a big impact on someone's health. It's not a life and death situation. So it is not that everyone can have similar architectures and everyone can have awesome architectures. And we'll talk about all of this. Why not? What are these different factors that you have to think about when you're thinking of architectures? But think of why not everyone has the same architecture. Why are architectures so different? Why does it matter that people have different level of understandings with respect to their use cases? So before we go into all of that, let's take a little bit of history of well architected. What is this I'm talking about? What is this well architected framework that you're talking about? So I'll try to push this through. So well architected is old. It started in 2012 as a thought process that all of these solutions architects that are working with a lot of customers, we gather all the information that we're getting from a lot of different customers that we are sharing with our customers, and try to build a framework around that, try to build a knowledge base around that, right? And that's how it started as well architected. uh, Me as an essay, like I told you, right, I used to do well architected review. So that's, let me see if I can get a pointer. Green, okay. Okay, these are laser pointer. So if you see that as an AWS SA, I used to go meet my customers. There could be teams from, there could be the CTO sitting in the room, there could be DevOps teams, there could be developers, all of us sitting in a room trying to understand. Acha, what is this customer doing from ground up? Okay, we'll talk about architecture. I would also talk to them about, Acha, how is your VPC setup? Like, talk to me about that base layout that you have. Thank you for that, Rishikesh. So we definitely talked about a lot of this. We came up with a report. I used to share it with my customer. What are the best practices they should be doing? What are the new things AWS has launched that they should look at? What are the things that maybe are not helping them in the long term? So we used to do these reviews. Then we started having a lot more things like pillars and questions. We'll see what is all that. And then recently, just this reInvent, we announced sustainability pillar. Now, for the SSA Bootcamp, I don't think sustainability pillar will come because it's still very new. So that's why I'm not going to be talking a lot more on sustainability. But there are a few blogs, there are a few sessions that talk about sustainability. And if you are someone who is interested in that topic, definitely do check that out. So why do you need the framework, right? The first thing is you want to be able to build your applications faster. You want to reduce the firefighting, not worry so much about capacity management. You want to use automation. You want to experiment. You would want to lower or mitigate your risks. Like you understand the risks in your architecture and you address them before actually having some kind of impact on your business, right? And it could also distract your team. So try and understand the risks that you're taking with your current setup. Then you have some informed decisions. Okay, this is the reason we have selected certain architecture. Then what is the impact it may have on business? How are we going to mitigate that? What are the decisions that we need to take around it? And of course, best practices. I mean, well architected framework gives you lots of best practices. uh, there is a well architected framework that is general. Okay, so it is generally applies to almost all different kind of workloads that you have. And for the SSA bootcamp, I would suggest you look at the general well architected framework. There are lenses as well. So there is a serverless lens and there's other lenses that you can add. That is optional. Serverless, I would still suggest if you're interested to go for to it, but that is still optional for your SS Solutions Architect Associate Bootcamp. Okay, so definitely. So, what are the different mechanisms? First is you want to learn the strategies and best practices. You want to measure your architecture against these best practices, and you want to improve your architecture by addressing any needs. Right. So now the what does the well-architected framework? Now I've told you so long. Like there is a framework. What does it provide? It provides you pillars. So there are 6 pillars. Okay. There are design principles, and there are certain set of questions that it provides to you. Okay, so what are these pillars? Let's look at quickly. There are 6 pillars, like I mentioned to you: operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, cost optimization, and sustainability. Okay, these are the 6 pillars that you have. Now, each pillar will have, so there are some general design principles which you'll see in the next slide, but each pillar will also have its own design principles, and each and all of them will have certain set of questions, and you will have automated response. Now I'll move away from slides because I do want to show you what it looks like, right? If you go to the website of AWS Well Architected, you can see that there is a mention of a tool, there is a mention of the pillars. There are different lenses, like I mentioned, there's a serverless lens, there are other lenses. And if you go down, so you can click on that, actually, it will take you down. But you can see that there is a framework overview. We'll check this out. Then you see the lenses for well architected. There is a management government lens, there's a hybrid networking, games industry lens. There are different lenses for machine learning, SAP, lots of them. Okay, so let me open this. If I open this HTML page, it will open here. So if you see in the framework, it gives you the pillars. So it will tell you, acha, there is operational excellence and the 6 pillars that I mentioned. Okay, if you click on, let's say, security, security will have its own design principles, like what does it mean for security pillar, what are the best practices around security pillar. So you could check it out like this, or there's a better way of doing it as well. Go to appendix, there is questions and best practices. Let me just give you this link. Let me just give you a link in the chat section. So go to the questions and best practices, go to security. Let's click on security. And here you will see questions in security section. So for example, how do you securely, I mean, this is not a really fun question to discuss. Uh, how do you manage authentication for people and machines? Okay, and it also explains you what is people, what is machines, what are identities, and it will also tell you what are the different best practices with respect to security. So it will tell you in a line or two lines, okay, you should use strong mechanisms for sign in, like you should use multi-factor authentication, you should use temporary credentials. So it will tell you all these best practices. You scroll below, you'll start seeing all these questions like how do you manage permissions, and how do you do, let's say, how do you protect your network resources? What are the best practices on that? How do you protect your compute resources? What are the best practices around that? So you will find a lot of good information in this one document. That's the document I've given in the section. Now, someone asked me what are the lenses. So, for example, this is very generic. Okay, this well architected is very generic, so it will apply to almost every workload out there, right? It could apply to a workload of a startup company or an enterprise. It could apply to your typical websites or to some other use cases as well. The lenses are specially built questions. Now, I showed you these questions, right, in security. In lenses, you will find specific questions that are pertaining to that service. So, for example, let's say there are a lot of these actually. Serverless was one of the first ones. So, for example, I talk serverless because almost everyone gets serverless, and you had a session on serverless. But if you open serverless, right, serverless will also have the same design principles that are generally available, but it will also have scenarios for serverless specific. So, what are the best practices for serverless workload, right? So, that's where your lenses are helping. I hope that answers your question. Your lenses will add a layer for that specific thing, like best practices for that specific lens. So that's where your lenses help you. So if you're just preparing for the SAA's bootcamp, then I would suggest look at the basic well architected framework and maybe a serverless framework, but don't go in all of them. If you don't have that kind of time or if you're not interested, it's fine, you can skip it for now. Okay, so let's go and talk a little bit more on the general design principles. Now, I will try to make it a little bit interactive because in the end, it's all just information that you have to start grabbing, right? Now, what are the general design principles? See, because cloud computing opened up the technology space to a whole new world of, thinking differently with respect to constraints that you're using in a traditional environment versus cloud. So in cloud, when you have your applications that are running into cloud, it's a little bit of contrast of how you would think from a traditional environment. So let's see how to think of that contrast. In a traditional environment, you had to guess the capacity, like what kind of infrastructure are you going to need, how many machines are you going to need, and that would generally be based on some kind of high level business requirement and certain demand that you would have predicted or projected. Acha, we need so many, so we need so many machines. And all this used to happen even before a single line of code is actually written for your application, right? Versus in cloud, you don't need to guess your capacity needs, right? You don't have to plan your capacity like the way you used to for traditional environments, like months in advance. You don't have to do that. If you need more capacity, you can always get more capacity in the cloud environments, virtually infinite, right? Then you couldn't afford to test at scale because then you had to buy extra infrastructure to test at scale. But in cloud, you can test at scale. Once you're done with your testing, you can just shut them off and you can stop paying for it. Then you can allow for architectures to evolve. We have already talked about that. You can have your different proof of concepts because, hey, if I need two machines or 10 machines, I can just switch them on and play with it and switch it off, right? So you could always do all of these things. And now you don't have to plan for huge BCP days that, okay, one day we are going to sit and we are going to make everyone sit in the office and see how our system is impacted and all of that, right? Now you can have regular game days. You can have, if you've heard about the terms in chaos engineering, you can apply your chaos engineering principles and you can test your environments while they are running. You don't need to stop one day and think, oh, we got this issue, so how are you going to fix this? You can practice or you can test these issues at scale, right? So in the cloud, these constraints are removed, and that's why you should think about these constraints in a different way, and you should use these principles for your advantage. Now, I've talked a lot for last 15-18 minutes, so I'm just going to take a pause, and this is a question for all of you in the audience. This could be a typical monolith traditional uh, application. Okay, let's say we put all of these components on just one single machine, on one single EC2 instance. Okay, just as an example, this is placed on one single EC2 instance. What are the typical challenges that you see here? What are the challenges that you see if I put all of the web and application and database? What are the challenges that you're seeing here? I'll just give a second pause while I have a sip of water. Just type in the chat section. I'm looking at the chat right now. And if you want example, I'll give you an example. Like, okay, it is a single point of failure. That EC2 instance, if it fails, your whole application is down, right? What are the challenges that you see? So tell me in the chat section, what are the different challenges you see in an architecture that would just have one EC2 instance with everything hosted on that one EC2 instance? Yes, yes, there is an access. Okay, Thirumaleshwar, can you add a little bit more on what do you mean by access? Exactly, Rohit. It's a single point of failure. EC2 may go down, definitely. If your EC2 instance fails for whatever reason, it will go down. Your entire application is going to go down. Abhijit, you're definitely right. Load will increase, right? So application load can increase on this EC2 instance, then everyone's going to start eating that CPU and memory, right? Like if the database doesn't get enough CPU memory, your entire application is anyways going to fail in this case. If your web and app start consuming a lot more resources, your database doesn't have resources, it's going to die. They're definitely right. If the load starts increasing, resources going to be consumed a lot more, and the instance is going to go down. Anyone else wants to give a chance before I go ahead and tell you what are the different problems that you may face here? So you have to always think about this, right? You have to always train yourself, and it takes a while, but you have to train yourself to look at architectures and see what could be the potential issues. If you want to become a solutions architect, I've seen some of the best solutions architects I've worked with that they could predict what issues this customer will have maybe in future, right? And these guys are highly appreciated by customers because they can see the problems, and they can, if you see the problem, you can obviously find a solution, and you are a solution architect. Yes, there is a there, yes, rediops will increase. There's a security threat. There is tightly coupled architecture. Exactly, Rishikesh, that's a good word to use. Database app will depend on single machine. It's not the right practice. Auto scaling won't be possible as different type of traffic come. Exactly, yesterday you had your auto scaling session, I remember. So definitely good pointers here. There is issues with high availability. There is issues with fault tolerance. What happens if this thing fails? How your system is fault tolerant? What happens when that problem occurs? How are you going to have high availability? What if more load is coming in? How is your application showing high availability? What about security? What about scale? How is this going to scale? Are you going to add same 100 boxes of the same setup? Like for example, some people will be like, acha, the web app database na, auto scale this and add more web app databases. But you're not thinking that your database should only be one, right? Not multiple. You cannot just replicate this into multiple machines and it will work. You have to start thinking about a lot of these things, that how you can make it loosely coupled. Someone mentioned tightly coupled, Rishikesh mentioned tightly coupled, but you have to think about how you make it loosely coupled, how you could make deployments easier, right? If I want to deploy something, if I want to upgrade something in, let's say, my app layer, will it take down my database and my web layer as well? What about reliability? On security perspective, you're giving public access to one machine. Everyone has access to your database, right? Even if you're not open the port, someone gets access to that machine, will easily be able to get into your database as well. What about cost? Now, in this case, it's one machine. So I'm saving cost, right, Rohini? What is the problem with cost in this case then? This is just one EC2 instance. How much is going to cost me? But think about it. Cost is not just how much you're spending. Cost is thought of how much your business impact will have. If your business gets impacted because of all these issues, you're not going to, your users are going to have bad experience. Your users are going to not use your product. Your users are going to leave. Then that causes a business impact as well. So while your infrastructure cost is very small, it's really not helping your business in any way. So cost is also an important factor. It should not be that uh, you are let me use a word like you're so chindi that you're not even doing anything for it, right? So definitely cost is an issue. So let's talk about a few things that we could do with this architecture. This is a little different approach I want to take. I don't want to just bore you with those design principles. You can always go and read about it, but I want to help you think about how you can improve this, right? So let's talk about a little bit about reliability. Now, reliability is one of the pillars of well architected. So what is reliability? We need to build systems that embrace failure as a natural occurrence. So we know that our systems are going to fail and every component of that system is going to fail. It's fine, but we need to build systems that will embrace that failure and be able to survive that failure. We will be able to get past that failure, right? So for the ability, yes. So the ability of the workload, definitely Bhakti, good points. The ability of a workload to perform its required function correctly and consistently over an extended period of time. So how can we add those components? Let's just try to break down that stupid monolith application that we saw. So what are the things that you could do is don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? There is a saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So scale horizontally to increase aggregate workload availability. And a lot of you learned auto scaling yesterday, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I do want to give you an example of what does it mean by vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Okay, so in case of vertical scaling, let's see where my mouse is. Let's say you had four EC2 instances, 1, 2, 3, 4 of C5.large. Okay, and what you could say is, okay, all these four EC2 instances, I want to add more resources to these EC2 instances. Okay, so if this is instance 1, instance 2, instance 3, instance 4, they should stay the same. I just want it to have, instead of 2 vCPUs, now it should have 4 vCPUs. So that is vertical scaling. So it's the same box. You just added capacity and increase its resources. So that is vertical scaling. So C5 large now became C5 extra large. Okay. Now in this case, if once you added more capacity, if one of your instance goes down, your capacity will actually be reduced to 75%. Does that make sense? So if you have four EC2 instances and for some reason one of the EC2 instance goes down, your capacity is now reduced, your capacity is now 75%. So your application is available 75% than what you thought about. But if you think of what horizontal scaling instead of vertical, you think of horizontal scaling. So instead of having four C5 dot large instances, you could have 8 C5 dot large. Now, if you think from a cost perspective, the cost of these four and these eight is going to be same because it's just double and you are just adding one more set of EC2 instance. Does that make sense? Let me know if audience that doesn't make sense. But the cost of these four C5 extra large will be similar to these 8 C5 dot large. So if you have 8 C5 dot large, if you lose one EC2 instance, your capacity will be reduced to 87.5, which is still better, right? Because you can then replace this one EC2 instance with another, or you can add two more to make the capacity better, right? So from cost perspective, I'm actually having the same cost, but my capacity, my reliability of my system is much better. So replacing instances with larger instance types is vertical scaling, but you will reach a limit someday. Someday you would be at the highest level of instance type. and you will reach that and you will have to stop there. But when you do horizontal scaling, there is really no limit to this. You can add as many instances as you want behind your load balancers or your application. So definitely horizontal scaling will ensure your failures have a lesser impact than vertical scaling. That's how you have to think about scalability. Now that web app database. So instead of having three different machines of web app database, what you would ideally do is you have a web layer, you have an app layer, you have a database layer. Now the reason I'm keeping it simple to three-tier applications because a lot of times some people get confused with a lot of different terminology. So I'm just keeping it very simple to web app database. Okay. Just think of layers. You're talking about layers and nothing complicated here. So idea is instead of having them tightly coupled, make them loosely coupled. Now based on your application, now you can scale each individual layer on its own. So now you can scale web as the requests come in. If web wants uh, more CPU or more resources, it can scale on its own, app can scale on its own, and database can scale on its own. We'll still again explore and evolve this architecture, so don't worry much about it. Then you have to use AWS availability zones within a region. What are availability zones? Availability zones are fully isolated infrastructure with one or more data centers, right? So an availability zone A will have more data centers inside it. So the more different availability zones that you're going to use, I'm sorry. But the more availability zones you're going to use, they will have more meaningful distance for separation. So even if one availability zone dies, your application still runs on other availability zone. So you have learned this in your auto scaling session yesterday. I'm hoping you have, but these data centers are still connected, but they are still isolated. So even if one data center has an issue, your application will continue running across different application. So let's see how we can use it, right? So for example, here you're scaling, you're adding these EC2 instances and not just one availability zone, but multiple availability zones. So even if availability zone, let's say B is having issues, your application will still continue running from A and C. That's how you think about reliability. You remove single point of failure. Now from one EC2 instance, you added multiple EC2 instance. Great. Now from one availability zone, I added more availability zones. And remember, each availability zone has more data center. So a failure of a particular component in that system will not actually take down your entire system. So always think about removing single point of failures. That's a best practice. Always try to reduce the impact of any issue that is happening. As distributed as it is, as multiple as it is, smaller resources will fail, but then it will have a smaller impact and it will not have a common point of failure. Next is stop guessing capacity. So for example, we were talking about auto scaling, right? So in auto scaling, you can provision capacity automatically based on your demand. So instead of just having these four EC2 instances that are running on their own, let's say your ops person says, I think we need more than four instances. Then you have discussions, such do we need more? What if we add two? What if we do one? And by the time you have these discussions and start something up, your these four EC2 instances have died already. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. There is auto scaling already there, which uses CloudWatch, which uses talks to your auto scaling, talks to your load balancer that, hey, too many requests are coming in. I think I need more capacity. Can you just start adding that? And you can automatically start doing that. Now, one small tip that I give my customers is that when you're using auto scaling, please don't just turn it on one day and expect it to work like magic. Okay, you have to keep monitoring what you're doing in auto scaling. You have to keep monitoring which metric you have used. Sometimes a lot of customers use wrong metrics that don't make sense for their application, and then they say that auto scaling is not working as they want. Don't over add EC2 instances into your auto scaling group thinking that, I want it super, super fast. Uh, Definitely think about the cost because auto scaling you're doing for saving cost and your operations as well and improving reliability, right? So think about what could be the best possible combination of base instances and scalability for your particular auto scaling group. And the last tip I had was, and I forgot, I completely lost it. I'll come back to that. No worry. But don't just do on CPU and memory. Try to understand what metrics make sense for your auto scaling group and use those metrics. You can do custom metrics for auto scaling as well. So try to do that. And there is auto scaling for EC2, but there is also auto scaling for other services, like there is for containers and DynamoDB as well. So try to use auto scaling, try to identify your correct metric, try to monitor it for at least a couple of months, tweak it around for your particular use case. And now auto scaling has evolved a lot, right? You can add different EC2 instance types, you can add spot instances. So a lot of different things can be done to improve reliability while saving money. So the three tier that we looked at, the web app database, okay, so these three, now what you could do is you could put your web, if it's just HTML and CSS and static, you could put it into S3. Okay, so that's how your architecture is now evolving. If I have static for the web layer, I don't think I need EC2 instances that are going to run unnecessarily, right? You can put that in your S3 buckets. The next is your application. Okay, so I need my API layer, I need my app layer. Let's host it on EC2 instances. Let's use auto scaling for now and make sure that my demand is met and the reliability is improved. Now with S3, S3 comes with its own durability. It comes with its own redundancy. So you don't have single point of failures because the service itself does it for you, right? But when you're doing it on EC2, you have to take care of how you're removing the single point of failures, how you're adding that resiliency into your application. And finally, for the database layer, what if that one database that I have, what if that one database dies, right? So you have to think about, in traditional environments also we used to do this, right? You used to have a primary and you used to have a standby. Similarly, if you're using managed services from AWS or if you're hosting it on EC2, think about how you can add, what if this primary fails, how I can have a standby. Now, a lot of people do a standby and read replicas as well, but that is a discussion for cost. So we'll talk about it later. So that's it. This is how your architecture would have evolved, right? So what are the reliability principles? Automatically recover from failover. If an EC2 instance dies in an auto scaling group, EC2 will automatically replace that EC2 instance. Test your recovery procedures. Don't just create the system and forget about testing. You have to test if things are normal, but you also have to test about things are abnormal. For example, um, if you've used chaos engineering, or there's a new service called as FIS, fault injection simulator, you could now tell fault injection simulator, this is my environment, just go and shut down EC2 instances in availability zone B, and then see how your application is responding to it. How is your application recovering from it? You can test resiliency of your application using some kind of services. So always test for best case scenario and worst case scenarios as well. Scale horizontally, we talked about that. Stop kissing capacity. You can add more capacity as and when you need using services like auto scaling. And manage the change in automation. Don't wait for humans to discuss and decide "Acha, wo, how many EC2 instances you need." Humans can sleep at 3 a.m. when you have sudden burst of traffic from some other part of the world when you are sleeping, or you're on a weekend and some extra traffic is coming in and you don't want to wake up, right, to do that extra work. So I'll take a pause. I do want to check if anyone has any questions or if anyone wants to ask anything, or if I'm going too fast, just feel free to mention that in the chat section. Let's go and check. I'm just looking at the chat. But if you go to reliability, these are the five things that we talked about. And if you go to best practices, you can find the questions and the best practices around those questions, definitely. So I don't see any questions, so let's move on to security, right? Security again is one of the pillars. What does security mean? We want to ensure that our customers take advantage of the services which we provide to protect your data, to protect your assets, so that you can minimize the risk of exposing your business, and concentrate on providing your great service to your customers, right? So AWS has something called as shared responsibility model. How many of you have read about shared responsibility model? Just tell me in the chat section while I sip water. Have you heard about shared security responsibility model from AWS? Just say yes or no. Just tell me yes or no in the chat that have you seen at shared responsibility model? Yes, I've heard. Thanks, Dora. Thanks for answering that. Let's see if yes. Awesome. You see, if you have seen my builders, by the way, I do have a detailed talk that I've done at Builders Online. I do have a link of this in one of my slides, so do definitely check that out. Okay, Abhijit, no worries. We'll talk about shared responsibility model. So this is very important to understand. A shared responsibility model not necessarily only works with security. There are a lot of other things that we talk with customers about shared responsibility model. Like there is one for sustainability as well. Uh, no worries, Abhijit, we will talk about it. So shared responsibility. Okay. So let me for now take a role that I am AWS. I am not, but I am AWS and you are a customer. Okay. I am AWS, you are a customer. So shared responsibility model. I, as AWS, take responsibility of the security of the cloud. Like I, as AWS, will take care of my data center security, the physical location of the security. Uh, I will also take care of the services that I'm providing. So I'm providing you EC2 and S3 and RDS. I will take care of securing the compute, the storage, the databases, the networking that I'm providing you, all the regions and availability zones. I take care of the security of that. Okay. So I focus on, I have specialized teams that will look at that because security is number one priority for me. And as a cloud provider, we want to make sure that it is a secured environment for our customers. Make sense? You as a customer have responsibility as well. You know, with great power comes great responsibility. Sorry for quoting Spider-Man, but you as a customer is responsible for security in the cloud. So you are getting your data, right? You're getting your data that you want to store or host on the cloud. So you as a customer have to take care of securing your data, of securing your workload. You have all the flexibility of doing it. Okay. And AWS provides you tools as well that you can use to secure your stuff that you're hosting on the cloud. Now, a lot of times you would think, so is AWS saying that, okay, I will secure the cloud, everything else is your responsibility and we don't take care of it? That's not how it works. What we are saying is a lot of customers have different requirements when it comes to security, right? You could be a student for whom you're not using any data that needs a lot of privacy or security or any uh, issues. It's just general data that is available elsewhere, and you don't want to bother about security. You want to just do your project and submit it, right? Versus you could be a enterprise, you could be a bank that is running on AWS, and you want to have the highest level of security that you could have for your applications. Now we cater to a spectrum of customers, right? They could be students to an enterprise to someone who's a startup, who's a vendor, a product vendor, or who's a consultant. Everyone has different levels of requirement, right? So to make sure that the platform is flexible enough for you, we give you this option that you go ahead and select what you want to do. I know I've spent a lot of time talking on that, but it's very important to understand where the security line occurs. Now this line varies as well. Okay, it's not always that okay, AWS will only take care of the infrastructure and everything else is your responsibility. Now that line moves as well. So when you go to a lot of infrastructure services, for example, you're just using EC2 from AWS, a lot of responsibility, if you see the one in blue, is your responsibility because we are just giving you a virtual machine with operating system in it, right? If you once you get that EC2 instance, you patch it or not, you upgrade the libraries or not, do you install certain antivirus or not, or firewall, and all of that is your choice. right? So you as customer have a lot more responsibilities. But if as you go towards the abstracted service, as you go towards managed services, for example, you could be talking about S3, where AWS takes care of the entire security and you just get in your data, right? You're just storing your data into S3 and you have the option to select if I want to have encryption on it or not, or who has access to it. So you have less customization options, yes, but you have less responsibility as well. I hope this clears out the shared responsibility model, that it's always going to be a shared responsibility between you and us. And you can check out a lot of security best practices in the couple of white papers. What are the tools that AWS provides? There are a lot of tools. Okay, now we try to categorize them into these six epics. So from infrastructure protection to identities to data protection, detection, incident response, compliance. There are a lot of different categories, and you can find a lot more information. So let's quickly shift to the let's go here. And if you see the best practice section, almost all of these are categorized here. So what are the best practices when it comes to identity and access management? What are the best practices for infrastructure and data protection? So you can definitely read a lot about these in the documentation. Now, what I have done is I have a session in Builders Online. So you can just go to this link. Let me see if I can open that link here and send it to you. So there are a lot of awesome sessions that we have from Builders Online. So you can go and check that out, because what I do, let me just add that link in the chat. What I have done is I've tried to break down the security aspect into three main things. And to be honest, these three main are important for your solutions architect associate. So do definitely check them out if you have not. We talk about identities, we talk about data protection at rest and transit, and I also talk about infrastructure. I know some of you have seen that session, and I'm really happy that that session has helped you. But definitely it talks a lot in detail. So do check that out. Uh, But let me give you a little bit of broad picture. I will not dive deep, just to save time and not bombard you with a lot of information. We have a service called as IAM, and I think IAM is covered. Sanchit, correct me if IAM is not covered, but I think IAM is covered. Think of the name of that service, right? Identity and access management, right? So it's AWS identity. Identity. What is identity? Identity is need for authentication. Who are you? Why do you need? Who are you, and what access do you need? Right? So in identity, you could see there could be human identities, that is you and me, we are humans, and there could be machine identities, that EC2 wants access to S3, or Lambda wants to access a database or RDS or DynamoDB. These are machine identities, right? So what are these different identities, and what is the authorization? Now you all know, hopefully with IAM session, that you can write something in JSON and you provide an access to these identities, that what can this identity do in your AWS environment. So that is the identity and access management as a service. Do check out the security best practices for IAM. Yes, username and password. There are a lot of other things that you could have for identities as well. So do check out the security best practices in IAM. It lists down a lot of things, like what all different things that you should do for IAM specifically. Okay, this is very important. So do check it out. Even if you're not doing certification, but you're just taking care of AWS account for your company, do check that out. You should, as a best practice. Okay, so let me give you a couple of best practices as I can with security. I'm just looking at time, it's 46 right now, so I do want to see if I can spend some time on something else. But implement a strong identity foundation. A lot of times, a lot of people don't do this. They have created IAM user, one IAM user used by 10 people. Okay, and one of the 10 people leaves the organization, and hopefully not on good terms, but sometimes it happens. People are terminated from the organization. And a true story, okay, I'll tell you a fun story. I mean, it was not funny actually, but there is a true story that happened. One of my customers, they had an employee who was terminated, and this employee had access to AWS account, and the customer didn't follow the best practices. They just had one IAM user, which everyone was using, and this IAM user had administrative access onto the account. Now the person was very angry when they left. So before they left, or before they left or after they left, they actually went ahead and deleted certain AMIs and deleted data from their S3 bucket. And all they had to do was they were like, "What is happening? How did this happen?" And they had to actually remove access for everyone. And then it was just a huge mess because they lost a lot of data. And that's the thing, like people don't follow a lot of best practices, that you should give each individual user one IAM user, hopefully part of a group like administrator or developers. Don't give everyone access to everything, least privileges. Give them separate permissions. You can have federation, right? So for example, you can integrate IAM with your local directory like LDAP or Active Directory for single sign-on. Okay, so you don't need username password separately for AWS. Does that make sense? You don't need username password separately for AWS. Username password that you use for your local LDAP or Active Directory or SAML, you could use the same thing to log into AWS, right? So you could use that same individual policy. So for example, if that person leaves your organization, they are removed from your LDAP, they automatically are revoked from access to AWS. Does that make sense? Like you're not having to add extra steps. Your exit policy of your organization will automatically apply to exit policy from the AWS account as well. So there are a lot of different things. First is centralized identity provider. Connect with your local systems. User groups and attributes. User groups. I am administrators, developers, and managers, and just billing. Have different groups. Have different credentials, temporary credentials. AWS IAM role. IAM role is not just for machine identities. IAM roles can be used for human identities as well. If you have not tried this out, do check it out because that will be one of the questions in your certification. Grant least privileged. Remember these keywords, okay? Even if you don't understand what they mean, grant least privilege. Remember these keywords. You should not give access to everything to everyone, okay? Give separate access what people need access for. Strong sign in mechanisms, username, passwords, set your password policies. I'll talk about that in the next slide. Audit your credentials, store your secret secretly. This is the password policy that looks like. You should also have MFA, enable MFA, make people enforce it, that people should use multi-factor authentication. You don't need a device anymore. You can use tools like Authy or Google Authenticator, but make sure people use MFA. Even IAM users, okay, don't allow people to log into your account without multi-factor authentication. So definitely do that. And very, very, very important thing, establish emergency access. If you just give one person or root account access to everything and you don't have emergency access, administrative account access, a lot of times I've seen people do this, that I've forgotten password or I've lost the MFA device and I cannot log into my AWS account. Always have some kind of emergency access process to get access to your AWS account, right? So now, there is another design principle, that is apply security at all layers. Let me give an example. You stay in an apartment, okay? Most of us stay in an apartment. Apart from the lucky ones who have their own houses, most of us stay in apartments, right? Uh, if someone is coming to your house, a guest, what are the different layers of security they have to go through? There is a security at your main gate, right? The gate of your society. There's a compound and there's a gate for your society. Once they go there, they come to your lobby, right? They come to your lobby. There's a security guard sitting outside your wing or your lobby, and they are taking notes of who has come and when they have entered your house and when they're getting out, right? Then from there, they come to your main door of your house. Okay. Once they come to your main door of your house, you decide, do you want to open that door or not? Once they come to the main door, can this person directly go to your bedroom? You have a door for your bedrooms as well, right? So you can lock in your bedroom doors and stop people from having that access. So think about the different layers of security you've added just for your home. Can you not think of different layers of adding layers to your applications as well? If you think of any other examples of security layers, do definitely tell me in the chat section so that I'll also start using these analogies. This is one analogy that I thought about that use security at all layers. So definitely mention that in the chat. So you have VPC, right? Amazon Virtual Private Cloud. Virtual as in logical, private as in isolated, right? So you may have already had a VPC session a long time ago, so I'm not going to go deeper into it, but you need something like a CID or IP for your VPC, and then you break that VPC down into different subnets. So if your VPC is 10.0.0/16, you have one subnet into it that is /24 and another subnet into it /24. So you carve out different sections in the VPC. There's a reason why I'm telling this. Some of you may think like, why is she saying all these basic things? Trust me, a lot of times just to skip doing best practices or just to save time, a lot of customers just end up using the default VPC that AWS provides. And you cannot believe, I'll tell you a real life story. One of my customers, a very good customer, been on the platform for last 10 years. What they did in their production environment, they were using default VPC, they were using the default security group for production environment. Okay. And someone in their team just went ahead and removed the access for port 80 and port 443 for their application web load balancer. And the system was inaccessible for a while. And then they started searching as to what happened and how was this possible. They use a default security group, which typically anyone who's new or wants to play around, everyone uses default security group. The first thing they had to do was create a new VPC. If you're doing production environments, ideally you should have different accounts, AWS accounts, prod and non-prod. If you don't want to have different accounts, at least have different VPCs. Some customers also have different regions, so they could host their non-production in, let's say, a cheaper region, or not, I wouldn't say cheaper, but a little bit more cost effective region like US East 1. And they would have production account which is more closer to their end users, let's say in India. So you could also think about architectures like that you don't need to put all of these things in one single account, one single VPC. Separate it out. You're not paying extra for VPC. Just create different VPCs for production, create different security groups, create different subnets for the different layers. So what are these different type of subnets? There is a subnet for public access, there is a subnet for egress only, for private access with NAT or private access. So there are different types of subnets that you can create as well. Identify what type of subnet is required for what type of tier for your application. Don't just put all of them together. I've seen so many of them do this mistake. Everyone just puts everything in public, or they'll just put everything in one single bucket in private. Please don't do that. Separate them out so that if you have to stop access or there's an issue, there's a DDoS attack, you can always use network access control list to stop that attack to that particular this. So add these layers, right? Add these different layers, reduce your attack surface. Please remember that. This I already told you, right? There's an account overcrowding. One account, multiple VPCs, no one knows who's using what. Everyone just creating EC2 instances everywhere. And this happens very, very, very quickly because there's no line of demarcation, there is no tagging, people don't know what they're doing. Yes, you're right. ACL, I mean, network access control list. Yes. So people just go crazy, and this happens a lot in bigger accounts because everyone's just using, and people are like, Acha, who is this? No one to control. I'm just going to go and create everything. This happens a lot. Don't do that. Have, because if there is any issue, right, and you want to figure out what is happening and who has access to what, it's going to be a terrible, terrible mess, and you will end up in a lot of issues. Have separate account strategy. Maybe you could have an account per function, or you could have accounts for production versus non-production. You you could have accounts that are department specific, that are workload specific, but do have that demarcation. So you understand, who has access to what, and you can give minimum access to people. If they leave, you can remove that access. You can also understand how much they are spending. A lot of time this issue happens that you don't know how much they're spending. And a lot of you will say, but you know what, we get this cost detailed report, so we'll know, right, from tagging how much. There are a lot of things that are not calculated in the tag based detailed reports, right? Like for data transfer or other stuff. So a lot of times customers keep these accounts separate so they know how much they're spending. So for example, one of my customer was spending, I think, 70 to 80% of their budgets in a non-production environment versus the production. So what is actually generating revenue? They're spending very less amount on that, but a lot on non-production environment. And then they realized a lot of their developers just start EC2 instances. Once they're done with the POC, they don't terminate it, they don't clean it off. There are a lot of snapshots and images, and everything is just sitting in that account. That is costing them a lot of money. Okay, so don't do that. Try to control a bit, try to understand what people are doing, if they are terminating, if they're cleaning stuff or not. So have this demarcation, then you will have that visibility better. So let's recap a little bit. What are the different security principles we saw? Implement a strong identity foundation, enable traceability. You need to know what is happening. And if you have mess, you won't know what is happening. Apply security at all layers. Automate a lot of best practices. For example, there are certain CloudWatch alarms where you could say, if someone tried to log in using my root account credentials and they entered password incorrect password 3 times, send me an email alert. Or someone is trying to create a very huge EC2 instance, which they are not allowed to do so, send me an alert. So you can definitely create a lot of these alerts, a lot of this automation using CloudWatch alarms. There are some pre-built CloudFormation templates for that as well. So do check that out. uh, Protect your data. Okay, do watch that session that I mentioned in Builders Online. I do talk about data in transit and data at rest and how we can protect that. Keep people away from data. I know we want to trust people we work with, but when it comes to data, try to have an anti social aspect to it. One sec. And prepare for security events. Document everything that you've been doing. Uh, Run game days. If an issue happens, you should know whom to contact, what is your escalation metrics, who is going to help you in a particular situation. Make sure you document everything. See, people leave organizations anytime. That information should not be lost when you lose people as well. Right. So I'm just going to take a little bit of break and see if you have any questions. I know Thirumaleshwar, thank you for chatting with us. Do chat with me in the chat section if you have any questions for reliability, for security that we have talked so far. I'll just take a quick sip of water while you type your questions. Sorry, I just few weeks ago I had COVID, so it's I still have that little bit of congestion, so I have to uh, keep doing that, give myself a little bit of break. But if you don't have any questions and if you have questions, feel free to add. Let's talk about a little bit of cost, okay? I know I want to keep uh, thoughts on the time as well, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about cost because cost is also one of the important factors for the pillar, right? So here we want to definitely deliver business values. Cost optimization is not just looking at your AWS bill and just understanding Acha, you're spending so much, let's reduce half of your workload. Stop all the EC2 instances and you'll not spend money. I mean, the ideal would be not using anything to not pay for anything, right? But that's not what we want. What we want to do is whatever money we are spending on the AWS platform, that is giving us a maintaining different accounts for work, our user accounts or brand new AWS organization accounts. So, okay, so there's a question. Let me take that question. Okay, thanks for that. Maintaining all different accounts for work are user accounts or branding. So when I'm saying account, it's a new AWS account. Okay, user, I'm user, so you can create as you want. But I'm talking about different AWS account as well. So it will have a different root sign in and different password, and it will get its own separate bill as well. Okay, so I'm talking about different accounts. You can definitely put them under organizations, and you can use organizations and SCPs to track the permissions and what someone can do in them. But creating different accounts definitely help for bigger organizations. I've seen a lot of customers do that because then it helps them isolate for security, helps them understand how much they are spending in different workloads. And helps them with a lot of things. Now, with organizations, you can then put them under one single master, but it helps them a lot. One more tip, actually, a lot of customers, what they do is uh, they definitely want support, right? AWS support, AWS support, as in where you add in a ticket and you get some customer cloud support engineer come in and help you, right? A lot of times what customers as do as well. So let's show you that instead of talking about it. AWS support, so that's premium support. Actually, let's go to premium support plan. Where is it pricing? Okay, so if you see your screen, developer is 3%, business is 10%, 3%. It depends on how much you're spending, right? So a lot of customers, what they do, and I'm just being honest, what they do, right? I'm not saying do this or not, but what customers do is, for example, I gave you an example, right? A lot of customers permission only to. Okay, great. So thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that link. So what I told you was customer production versus non-production. So if they're spending, let's give you an example, or easier, $7,000, for example, on non-production, but they're only spending $3,000 on production. And this customer wants support or wants to have that troubleshooting support only for non-production, because whenever there is non-production, production issue, they need help from AWS. When have the separate account, customer would purchase support on that production account, which is 3,000. So if you see 10% of whatever that amount is, they will only be charged on that. If they had the whole 10,000, 10% of 10,000 is 1,000, but instead they only go for 3,000 wala account, and the charges is $300, right? So they are saving $700 on business support charge. I hope that makes sense. So a lot of customers even do that when it comes to saving money. So there are these chotu botu tips, a lot of times I can give you across the section that customers do. So the idea is not to stop using AWS, but use it in a better way. So let's look at some of the design principles. The first is adopt a consumption model, right? Pay for what you consume and not just creating resources. For example, let's give you a layman example, right? Uh, my father, like most of our Indian parents, uh, if I go into a bedroom and I keep a fan on and I come out of the bedroom without switching off the fan, my father will be like a hawk after me and saying that you didn't switch off the fan, I'm paying for it when you're not in the room, don't switch on the fan, right? So that's the thought process. Like if you're consuming the services of a fan and you're in the room, great. But if you're not in the room, you're not using that service from the fan, switch it off because someone is paying for it, right? So that's the same thought process when you think about AWS. Adopt a consumption model. So for example, if you see my usage is the blue line, okay, here in this case, usage is the blue line. But if I'm always going to have resources that are going to cost me 60, you see so much wastage, there is no usage, but I'm going to still pay $60 for it. If there is extra usage, obviously the cost will increase. But when there is no usage, I'm paying $60. Why? Why am I paying that? So this is a very bad uh, spend, right? The next is you're trying to have it somewhat similar. So for example, my usage is in the orange here and my cost is 20. That's still okay because when my usage increases, my cost is still lower than my usage. The best would be when there is no usage, there is no cost spent. When there is usage, it shouldn't directly be proportional. Okay, let me give an example what I mean by that. So for example, if my demand for my application is going like this, my cost, even if my resources are going higher, my cost should not also be same. So if my demand is this, my cost should also not be same. You should try and optimize your application in certain way that your cost is not directly proportional to the demand. Your cost is always lower than what your demand is not directly half as well. I've seen customers do 3 times or 4 times extra resources on AWS just to make sure that the demand is met. That is a bad practice as well. So for example, let's look at an example. Shut down everything that you don't need, terminate resources that are not in use. For example, in production, when you usually require everything 24 by 7, but in development environments, testing environments, people are not working on weekends or people are not working outside office hours. Shut down those EC2 instances, shut down that resources so that you stop paying for money. There is a lot of automation scripts available now. So use those automation scripts to shut down your resources. This was a lot of savings because you're really saving money on, you're just spending money on the work hours on when they're actually using it and shutting it down for all the resources. Second tip, okay? Uh, a lot of times people say this, right? If purchasing reserved instances, exactly. I will come to that part, purchasing reserved instances. Second tip, a lot of times people are saying, okay, so if you're using EC2 instance, just shut it down when not required, and you can switch it on whenever required. So that is okay if you're using other EC2 instances every day, right? But if you're going to use that EC2 instance once in a month or once in a quarter, I would say create that EC2 instance, create an AMI, and just terminate that EC2 instance. Why? Even if you shut down an EC2 instance, there are three components, right, to a price: compute, storage, and data transfer. So when an EC2 instance is running, there are three components of pricing that you're paying: compute, storage, and data transfer. When, okay, I should have chosen a different finger, but when you, let's say storage, compute, and data transfer, okay? So when you shut down that EC2 instance, you stop paying for compute, you stop paying for data transfer, but you're still paying for storage. Remember this, when you shut down EC2 instances and with EBS volumes, you're still paying for those EBS volumes even if that EC2 instance is shut down. A lot of times customers make this mistake. Acha, I may or may not need 1000 GB drive, but let's create because I can so. And they create 1000 GB images when hardly their data is 50 GB, right? That is a very bad practice. Don't do that. Create a maybe 60, 100 GB, that's fine, but don't create 1000 GB, right? Second thing is, a lot of times, and this especially this tip that don't create huge storage applies to auto scaling, right? The reason is, when you're doing auto scaling, you want your EC2 instances to start faster, right? You want your EC2 instances to start faster and be part of your load balancer faster. If you give it a lot huge storage, the boot time, the boot time or the startup time for that EC2 instance increases. If you don't need a lot more storage, which you shouldn't really need for auto scaling instances, don't create a lot bigger EBS volumes. Okay, create smaller EBS volumes and treat them as immutable. So even if it gets full, push the logs outside that instance and shut it down. Right now, in this example, the idea is the same, right? So if you have 24 into 365 and 24 into 365, so this is production and this is dev test. So if in production 24 by 7, cool. But if you do the same for dev test, if you run it just 8 hours every day, then your approximate cost is 10,000. You're saving $17,000, which is a huge amount if you have to save. So think about all these different aspects when you're doing that. Stop spending money on undifferentiated heavy lifting. This is very important because a lot of times people think that they can customize things, and they want the full control, and I think we can do better. But a lot of times they don't realize that they're spending a lot of money into things that they really don't need to focus on, that doesn't really add any value for their business, right? So, for example, instead of using EC2 instances for use case, you could also think of serverless, right? So whenever you need that capacity, serverless will give you that capacity, do that process, and go back to sleep. You don't need to worry about, acha, how will I scale? I need to shut that down, instance down, and start it up, and all of that. It's okay. Use managed services, which can help you with that. Uh, Saving cost. We add bits, you add bytes. So that's how we talk about managed services. Use managed services wherever possible. Now, a lot of times I also say serverless is not a choice for everything, right? So do check out your use cases. Let me give an example why I'm saying this. uh, I had a customer, and the use case, I'll tell you what the use case was. So the use case was that this Lambda function will get up, will take the image that is provided, will go to a government agency API, okay, a government agency, to verify if the Aadhaar card is valid or not, or the driver license is valid or not. Okay, so it is Lambda is calling an API that is given by a government so that they can verify if this person's ID document, whatever they've provided, is valid or not. Okay. Now, in this case, the customer was paying a lot more money when they were using Lambda, because the government API was very synchronous. Okay, it was not an async call, because when they had to call that API, they have to wait for a response from that government API, and that government API could respond you in 30 milliseconds or in 5 minutes. There was no guarantee of when that API is going to respond to you. So that poor Lambda function is running for at least 5 minutes at most cases. And the customer was paying AWS because that Lambda function was just sitting there and waiting for that API to respond, right? So we suggested, and this comes from AWS because we want the customer to have best experience. We suggested the customer to not use Lambda in this case. They could have thought about using container based system, or even EC2 based system, but even container based system, where the container based system will not charge so much for the customer while it's waiting for that API call. So always think about use cases when you're selecting services. Don't just randomly use services, right? The next is purchasing option. Someone mentioned that reserved instance and savings plan. So just take time to read it while I sip water. So there are different types of purchasing options. Okay, there is on demand, there is provision. So you could say, and this is not specific EC2. Okay, if you're looking at it only from EC2, no, this is for most of the services at AWS. Okay, they could be on demand. For example, whatever you're using, whatever how much of data you're putting in S3, you will be charged for that. There is provision. So in DynamoDB, you have provisioned RCUs and WCUs and all of that. So based on that, you will be charged. You could also do certain reservations, like the one that someone Dora mentioned in the chat about reserved instances and savings plan. You could do certain reservations and get more discount from AWS. Now, a lot of services use a combination of these different multiple billing options. Okay, so remember these, because these do get asked in your bootcamp, in your questions, if I do reservations and whatnot. So first things first, if you have an AWS account, definitely create a budget alarm. If you've never done that, please put a reminder right now that you will go ahead and create a billing alert in your AWS account. You will thank me for it later on. There is a free tier as well. Free tier also has different things that you could have in the free tier account as well. Not everything is free, right? Remember, not everything is free in free tier. You could, where is my mouse going? Okay, I think my mouse is stuck. Okay, okay. So let's do this. My mouse got stuck. Sorry, guys. Um, so free tier, not everything is free. There are some trials as well, and certain things are always free from AWS. So cost optimization design principles. Let's do a quick recap before I move on to Q&A. Practice cloud financial management, it's given in the document. Adopt a consumption model, measure your overall efficiency. Are you spending a lot more money unnecessarily on undifferentiated heavy lifting? And definitely check out your this thing. So now what I'm going to do is, just to not bore you much, I think I've bored you enough. What I would do is I would tell you quickly what are the design principles for all the three left well-architected frameworks. So for example, operational excellence focuses on how easy it is to operate on your architecture, right? So perform smaller codes, perform operations as code, and not necessarily talking about infrastructure as code, but also for security or operations. Don't do manual interventions. Try to automate as much as you can. Try to limit your human codes. For example, if you're doing patch management on EC2, use systems manager, right? If you're doing frequent changes, use CI/CD pipelines. Plan for failure. You will always have to eventually fail. Something or the other in your system will fail. So create playbooks, run books, so that your teams are familiar with, if there is a situation that happens, what do you do in this failure? And definitely have your RCAs, document these RCAs. Some of the best teams in the world I've seen, they use Confluence and other tools to ensure that everything is documented. So if there is any issue, people can quickly search that documentation, right? Performance efficiency is all about how do you use advanced technologies? Do you use latest technologies from AWS? Do you keep checking what is new and do you implement that? Do you experiment? And do you see if performance versus cost is there or not? Sustainability is a new pillar, won't really affect your SSA bootcamp, but if you're someone who's interested in sustainability, do check that out. And sustainability has its shared responsibility model as well. Now, what do you do with well architected? Now, I've already told you where you can find the best practices for well architected. There's lots to read. Don't miss out on this document if you're giving solutions architect associate or the professional exam. Definitely read this document. If you are someone who wants to do hands-on, check out the well-architected labs. Okay, so there are labs for each of the scenarios. So for example, security, you can have how do I set up account? How do I do these things with best practices? Definitely check that out. And there is a tool that AWS provides for well architected. So go there, you define a workload, I don't know, some test name or something, pre-production or production, what regions do you want and everything. And okay, this does want some name. Uh, okay, Rohini. Okay, and what else? What else do you need? AWS regions. Uh, okay, let's give this one now. Hopefully that's fine. Do you want to apply a lens? Remember I talked about lenses in the start of the session. Right now I'm just going to keep it generic, just fine, and define my workload. Now what happens once you do that? You can then start reviewing, start reviewing. That's a tongue twister for me. And it will ask you a lot of questions. So let's talk about reliability, right? Uh, how do you plan your network topology? And it will ask you a lot of questions on how do you plan your network topology. You can then select from these answers. There's a lot of helpful information on the right side if you need. Why is this important? So that if you're working in an organization who wants to do a well architected review, you should definitely try this out. If you're an admin or a DevOps person, definitely try this out for your organization. It will generate a report in the end that will tell you how good are you or where you are currently with respect to your workload. So it will tell you what are the risk items, where you're doing great, what you could improve. Next 3 months you apply those things, you improve on those things, and you again run this, and it will show you, yes, you're doing very good on this. It will be really good for your um, image in your organization that you're doing something impactful and you're showing good work in your organization. So definitely do check that out and run this in your organization. Now, uh, I talked about this thing. Let's open for Q&A because I've talked a lot for last 1.5 hours. So I do want to open it for Q&A. So if you have any questions, and Sanchit, if you want to come online, you can come online as well. I'll be happy to talk about any of those topics if I'm not covered and you feel like Rohini talk a little bit more on that topic. I will be happy to talk about that. What's up, group? Says it full. Sorry. I think it's for you, Sanchit, that question.
No, I think Jonas, let's connect offline. We have Discord as a channel for study group. So if you haven't registered, the link is in the description of the video. You can register it, and for sure, it's not full.
Where is my mouse? I don't know why my mouse does this at times. Just lost. Jonas, connect with him offline. Anyone has any other question? Does anyone want me to talk a little bit more on reserved instances, savings plans, or do you want me to talk about payment methods? I'll definitely be happy to talk about any of the topics that you think is interesting or you want to know more. Jonas said yes. Okay. Where did that go? Ah, see. By the way, this thing is to like if you're interested and if you are someone. Thanks a lot. There was a lot of information. I know there's a lot of information. I will try to share a lot of information. I am planning to write certain blogs as well. If you are interested, you can follow me on dev.to. I'm going to be writing a lot of information and blogs this year on cost optimization, on security. If you have not seen my security session, definitely check that out. I have tried to detail everything out and give you a good overview of security. Thanks, Ramakrishnan. If anyone has any question, I'm happy to answer. Uh, no worries. Thanks, Dora. When are you guys planning your examinations? Let's ask that question to the audience. When are you all planning your exams? Have you already done your exams? You're here for refreshers or you're planning your exams? Have you booked it? I have to do my SA Pro, by the way. So I have to recertify. My SA Pro has expired. I think the third time it has expired now, and I have to redo it. But this will be the first time I will be giving a home procurement exam. Planning in April or May. Yes. I'm a fresher eagerly waiting for exam in 3 weeks. Wow, Jonas, you are on a tight deadline to give an exam in 3 weeks. Planning in April or May. Come on, it's April or it's May. You should plan it right now. Like, the best thing I've seen with exams is you book that exam and then you work for it. So if you have no questions, I want to give you some tips that I have with respect to the exams. I know you have a session next week, right, Sanjit? But few tips I can give you about the exam. Solutions Architect Associate exam. Everything should be multi-availability zone. Okay, so multi-availability zone is your best friend. Yes. Multi-availability and A and Elastic Cache. Okay. Uh, multi-availability zone is your best friend. So anything you see that, multi-availability zone is an option, just go for it. The next tip is that if you see, like the reason the well-architected framework is so important for SSA bootcamp, obviously it gives you a lot of best practices and a lot of good tips that you need to remember. But you will start seeing these keywords now, right? The pillars are the keywords for your questions. So if you see cost as how do you improve cost for this scenario, always pick up that keyword. Now you start seeing these keywords in your question: cost, reliability, high availability, fault tolerance, scalability, performance. So you will see these keywords, and remember that even if there is a Ramayana that is written in the question that is so huge, it happens in Essay Pro, by the way. The questions are so huge that by the time you reach, you're like, what is the question? What are you even asking about, right? But remember that keyword, that how can you improve cost for this session? And then you think of the answers from a cost perspective, add a cost lens to it, right? Whenever you're thinking about architectures as well, start thinking about these different pillars and ask yourself this question. See, anyone who has a lot of money to spend we'll have the best performing architecture. We'll have the best performing EC2 instances, or not even EC2 instances, some managed services. We'll have everything that they can take at the highest quality. But money is not easy, and everyone wants to save on money. So you will always have to take some trade-offs. That should I spend $100 here, or should I take a little risk and spend $50 and use that $50 or something else? So definitely think about all these pillars on when you're thinking about architectures, and especially for the exam, think about these different things. Okay, so Aries, you asked for Elastic Cache. There is a specific session number 6, and the link is in the chat section. So do check out that session for Elastic Cache overview. Thanks for asking that question, Aries. Uh, Okay. If anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to answer those questions as well. I know I see a lot of people here. Any comments you want, anything you want me to add that I may have missed, or you think that you need more information on that, feel free to do that. So I'm just going to stop sharing.
So yeah, guys, I think we'll take a couple of more minutes for any questions. And yeah, then I think we'll wrap if there is no questions.
Sanjit, have you done all certifications?
Yeah, I do have all 11.
Wow. Okay, that is awesome. So what were your thoughts on the well-architected framework? How have you used it in your organization?
So, I mean, that's a very good question to the right person, I would say. I'm the well architect practitioner in Quantify. So, I'm the one who promotes
Nice.
for all the workload and even officially been trained from AWS training bootcamp for well architect, what we have.
Interesting. So I remember when I used to do it, and this was years ago when the tool was not there for customers, right? We, as solution architect, used to have it, and I think the longest one I've had is 6 or 7 hours of reviews, just sitting in a team meeting and doing that because once you start doing the review, right, sometimes it becomes so boring. Few solutions architect would just sit there and ask questions and answers, and it would be just too boring, right? Ki, acha, he's auditing me and asking so many questions. So what I used to do, and I guess that was fun. What we used to do is we never opened the tool would be open in the last 1 or 2 hours. We just go in the meeting all blank, and most of the times customers don't have an architecture diagram. Trust me. Even if you tell them weeks in advance that we should have an architecture diagram, none of them will have an architecture diagram. And so we will be like, okay, fine, we don't have an architecture diagram, let's just use the whiteboard. Yeah. So then we used to go there, we used to sit down and introduce each other, and we'll be like, does anyone know what's happening overall? And people would be looking at each other. Hopefully one of them would know, like, okay, let's try to see what is happening. And they would draw an architecture diagram. So we used to do it from ground up, right? How have you set up your VPCs? Or first of all, how have you set up your accounts? How have you set up your VPCs? How are your instances placed? Who has access to it? We'll ask about all of these questions. What are your retention policies for your snapshots? Like, so many times a customer would be so worried about disaster recovery that they would and this is a real life story, not just one, two of my big customers used to do this. Okay, they'd be like, Ari, RDS is very expensive. And I'm like, RDS is expensive, like your usage is not high either, you're using DynamoDB as well, how is RDS expensive for you? So then when I sat down and checked through what they were doing, just to be cautious on disaster recovery, like anything happens for this RDS, we should have it. You know what their retention policy was? Snapshots, exactly. So automated snapshots, the hair, manual snapshots, they'll take it 4 times in a day and store it for 15 days. You know, I just sat down and did a calculation with them. Like, this is the amount you're just spending on snapshots. Tell me honestly, are you going to go and start the 15th day wala first snapshot any day, even if some issue happens? Why is the retention period so big,
Correct.
right? So a lot of times these are the things that pop up when you do the well architecture, and it used to be fun because sitting there and talking about these things and going deeper into particular stuff rather than just doing Q&A. The questions are good, they make you think, But if you don't do questions well, it's just snooze fest.
Correct. No, I mean, I got the exposure at both the sites before having the tool in offline mode as well as online mode, meeting modes. I've done both, as well as now also, as you mentioned, we very rarely open the tool. We have defined or draw the boundaries, like, okay, for each of the pillars, this is kind of information. And we take that run book to work out with the customers, with architectures, taking as the source of truth. So we very rarely open the WAR tool. So most of the time, customer also say, "Hey, how do you have this report generated?" I was like, "Okay, we didn't brought that up. We'll bring it up at the last. This is how you have the WAR tool, and this is how the report will generate it. We just want to make it more fun-loving session for you and more of interactive way to do it." So
Exactly, exactly. If you just open the tool and start asking questions, it just becomes so boring and snooze fest. I think Vishwas is asking a question, how is at scale deployment plan today? Now, that depends on a lot of things, right? That depends on the technology stack you're using, that depends on the comfort of your developers. Uh, that depends on a lot of different things. Yes. Okay, I'll answer that question as well, Jonas. So that depends on a lot of things, which was that what kind of deployments are planned, because I've seen a lot of companies, like for example, one of this instance when I was selling a well-architected review, they had a new DevOps head that had come in, and he wanted to change everything as per his experience. So we did a review where we sat for 7, 8 hours, and he was so appreciative of that review, because he was like, these guys are not telling me any of this when I asked. They are like, hacha, document, I just go and read it. But when we sit in these sessions and we dive deep into what is actually happening, I can now start seeing a lot of issues. Now I have more visibility into what my architecture is. And deployments, see, there are different ways of thinking about deployments, right? There is uh, what is, first of all, your technology stack, what do you want to do, how you're doing your deployments. Like the ones I mentioned, you should be doing smaller deployments, frequent deployments as possible. But not everyone is still, I think there is a range, right? Not everyone still does agile based deployments, not everyone still does DevOps based deployments. A lot of times, a lot of these systems are set up years ago, and these things are not put in practice. So first thing is to put things in practice, the principles itself of DevOps, not just the tools, but the practices and the culture aspect of DevOps is also to be focused on. And I know Vishwas, you know DevOps more than most of us. You've been researching on that for a while, so that is definitely to be done. But when you talk about at scale, right? I'll tell you what happens. For example, if you have an event that is going to come up. For example, uh, there's a World Cup coming up, and you, as a customer, are broadcasting that World Cup, or you are a customer who has a game that is based on a World Cup. A lot of times, these these event specific scaling has to be taken into consideration separately. So when you talk about auto scaling, that could be a general principle of your day-to-day scaling. Acha, day-to-day, I have this kind of demand and I need this kind of scaling. Awesome. But when you have one-off events, you have a sale that is going to happen for 4 days, or you have a seasonal offering, or you have a game that is going to be tied to a particular sport and sport activity. A lot of times, thanks. A lot of times, these have to be planned separately, right? And a lot of times, that's when we do well-architected reviews months before that activity happens, right? So that is also a reason we do well-architected reviews, is to understand the state of your system now and how it can be improved for that particular event. And if you are an enterprise support customer, you obviously get a technical account manager who does this hand holding with you and does a lot of important stuff with you, runs you through a lot of scaling and capacity management and all of those discussions. Because a lot of times, when I'm talking about these events, right, these customers are like spending millions of dollars for that particular event. So the kind of requirements is not just 10 or 20 EC2 instances or 1,000 EC2 instances. They need more number of EC2 instances. They need more number of compute capacity. And that's when it's very important to speak to AWS or speak to your consulting partner that I am going to need this kind of capacity. See, cloud is virtually infinite. There is reason I do this, because even if it's virtually infinite, you cannot you as a person cannot just go and start 10,000 instances, right? There will be soft limits into your account. And even we as a cloud provider have to run a business. We cannot just give everyone 10,000 instances account access. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done behind the scenes. And I see a lot of questions coming up. So I'm just going to try and answer one. I think you answered Vibhu's question on DevOps. Um, so you are a fresher in college. What do you want me to address with respect to fresher? Vibhu, do let me know from scratch. Okay, let's see if we can answer that. Ram, since the project is closed and we want to take the backup of the AMI, is it possible to backup of the AMI in local and delete the AMI? Uh, that is a little bit challenging because unless you have something that is supported like VMware or some kind of local setup, it's going to be a little challenging. But what you could do is you could back up the data inside that instance, right? Uh, because if you're not planning to run that uh, AMI or that snapshot on AWS again, then it's ideal to get your data out of that system, store it somewhere else, maybe even cost efficient storage like S3, or you can just download it locally and keep it. So that is one option. Or you could just keep it as an AMI in your account, and in future you need it, you just have to start an EC2 instance from that AMI. There are both these options are good if you want to do that. If you want to transfer something from a EC2 to local, it's just going to be a copy paste, right? And a normal transfer in that sense. You can't create AMI. It's not one of those days. I remember olden times when we used to have these ISOs that we used to create and keep it on a CD, right? Unfortunately, that is not going to be possible unless you have any idea, Sanchit, to add to that question.
No, I think that's exactly what I think Rohini you mentioned, right? I've seen most of the customer taking that up and storing it. I think one way you can also look forward from an EMI perspective, if you're like what exact details you have, you can accordingly break it down into your application versus your data. You can segregate it, and then
Hmm.
you can store your data maybe on S3 and
Or
your
Glacier,
entire application. Yeah, correct. And application as an script, automation script. Uh,
and
with
store that.
easy to prepare and all that you can just runtimely bring. So you can segment your EC to AMI and look that approach also, which is more cost effective.
Exactly. Okay. So next question, you want to take a next question regarding archiving and DR practice. What if a customer wants to recall their data or a snapshot to recall from more than a year ago? Okay, so see, recall your data. Okay, so what you mean is if, see, there are two things, right? One is you can always store your snapshots. I have snapshots that I created in 2014 and they're still in my account. So I can always recreate an EC2 instance from that snapshot and run it and get my data out of it. But if you have deleted it, then it's gone, right? If it doesn't matter that it's you're asking for that deleted snapshot a day later or years later. So if you have that data stored in some form in a snapshot or an S3 bucket or archived into Glacier, you can always retrieve that data out, right? Does that make sense? Like if you've deleted it, then there is no way AWS is going to keep it. Acha, because you've kept it deleted, I'm just going to store it. No, because you as a customer have the complete ownership on your data. So if you have deleted it, it's gone. But if you want to store it into a more cost-effective problem as storage as S3 or Glacier, you can always access it later on for archiving practices. The next is if they do daily backups in AWS, it would be very expensive to hold on to archive points. Would customers have to back up their snapshots to local storage at some point in time? I mean, let's look at that as an example, right? I don't want to go into the exact comparison, but think about this. Local storage, there is a reason you've selected cloud, right? Because cloud has become cost efficient over the time. If you think about scale perspective, if AWS has millions of customers and we are providing services to millions of customers, and because of economies of scale, we are able to give you a little bit cost effective storage solutions for you, right? So if you look at, let's give you an example. AWS S3. Oh, my screen is not shared. One second. Let me share my screen. Thanks for doing that. Um, let's look at S3. Okay. For S3, let's look at Mumbai maybe. If S3, I'm looking at first 50 terabytes per month, my per GB cost is very low, right? 0.025 per GB is my S3 cost. If I go to further, and this is just standard, right? If I go to further storages where I don't need a lot of redundancy, or I can have S3 as deep archive, can you imagine 0.0002 per GB? If you try to do this similarly on your local storage, first of all, you will have to worry about the redundancy of that data, right? Will you store it in one hard disk, or will you store it in multiple hard disks? How are you going to make sure of the redundancy of the data? Secondly, local storages are also not that cheaper. You have to maintain it as well. They, like, if I have to open a hard disk that, or a pen drive that I had 3 4 years ago, I'm going to be very worried if the data is still on that hard disk, because you have to maintain hardware as well. This cost that I'm showing you on screen includes all of that. It includes redundancy of the storage, it includes maintenance of that hardware as well, and it is available to you whenever you need it, right? So think, don't just think about cost as AWS is charging so much for storage. They're charging you for the services of other thing, of availability, of redundancy, of maintaining the hardware and deprecating older hardware as well. So when you're thinking about cost, compare this as well, not just 1:1. Acha, local hard disk is 1 terabyte is so much and AWS is charging so much. Never do that kind of comparison, because it's not apples to apples kind of a comparison. So anything you want to add, Sanchit?
No, I think also one point is like when we do backup and snapshot, right? One important thing is around the data, kind of the whole data which get piled up, right? So if you talk about months and years, I have seen like almost very lower use case outside auditing where people want to store. And when it comes to auditing, also the same thing. You can take the data out and store it into S3 in Glacier and all. From an EMI perspective, you also needs to be understand how at what frequency this information is getting stale, because you don't want to just keep the information and get that stale. It is going to be difficult. And the second thing is the whole idea of having backup and snapshot as a process is to get a faster disaster recovery. So if you go to
Exactly.
storage, you're not only paying for the outbound cost, plus when it comes to the real time where you need to leverage this process, it's going to take you hours to again restore on the cloud and then apply. So it's kind of an over engineering solution which you will build up. So you need to understand the use case, what you're doing. And again, if auditing is,
Exactly.
you can take the data, put it into Glacier, and that's what you can have that, right?
Yeah, makes sense. So your regular disaster recovery doesn't need to go into Glacier, because there is no point, right? By the time it comes out of Glacier and gets into production, it's already gone. So your DR strategy is separate and your archiving strategy is separate as well. And it depends use case to use cases. Like, for example, banking officials or banking customers have to store data for 7 years or 10 years of transactional data. Storing, do you think storing that data in RDS, which is a very live, frequent access, I want that data right now, I need it kind of storage, or do you want to archive it and keep it in a cold storage where you pay less for the storage and you may or may not need that data? So a lot of times, I think there is a document, 1 second, I'll try to find out by the time you're talking, but there is a very good document that I have found where it talks about a data access strategy. I'll try and find it out by not sharing my screen. But meanwhile, if there's any question you want to take, just feel free to do so.
Yep. So yeah, I think I've shared a playlist with you. This playlist includes all the sessions, right from core, from ground zero, I would say, to introduction to the cloud and AWS to all the services. So even if you are very new to AWS, you can follow that playlist. It has good demos and everything what we have captured so far from this bootcamp. So you can follow that playlist. And still, if you have any questions, you can register on Discord. We'll be happy to help you out with that.
Is it storage? Data requirements. No idea. So I have no idea where I found that information. I'll find it. I'll definitely put it in the comment section of this video. So don't worry.
Sure, Winnie. Yeah, I think that will be helpful. So yeah, I think we are almost over time by now. So but we are pretty good. I think with this session was really good, and I think this was hopefully for all the audience this was a good learning experience. Let me conclude the session. So I think I would really want to thank Rohini for delivering such an informative session. I know your health was not up to that mark, which we can see it, but really appreciate for pulling out the time. I am pretty sure all the participants would have really enjoyed and learn a lot from this session. As well as I want to
Thank you.
appreciate all the audience to be very good. I was just appreciating you in the background, Rohini, that all the audience are very sure. I'm pretty sure you're going to learn it. The questions are very good and very technical. So yeah, you have kept me up to the mark. That's I'm pretty happy for it. And just want to call out next week will be our finale week for this boot camp. We have almost will be ending our journey. We had a very long journey with you guys. Thank you for supporting us. Next week will be finale. Please keep following us. We'll have the kind of announcement going soon, but I can just give you some hints about it. The next session is going to be very good, fun, rewards, recognitions. It's going to be backed by everything. It's a less of technical, more of fun. So please do participate and please join our Discord. Please register in the Google form. So we'll also inform you via that Google form, via that registration if you haven't joined our bootcamp yet. So that's all what we have from this week. Thank you so much for being a patient audience. Thank you, Rohini, for being a wonderful speaker. And stay safe. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.